lot of investors at the end of the year often feel behind in their investment journey. What's interesting is that many of them actually didn't do so badly. And that's because that feeling isn't so much about performance than it is about comparison and timing. Feeling behind is an emotional state rather than a financial one. I recently finished Naval Ravikant's Almanac, and I can't help to think about the parallels when he describes the happiness versus desire gap. He puts it so beautifully when he describes that feeling behind comes from wanting to be on a different timeline, not the lack of progress. So, why then, if we had such a great investing year, is it more common than ever to feel behind in your financial journey? Firstly, it's that we are constantly getting visual cues about other people's outcomes. And not only is it happening in real time, but we're also almost exclusively seeing others' wins rather than the full story or their losses. What ends up happening is that you are comparing your portfolio to somebody else's highlight reel. This leads to the second point about the way that time is compressing. It makes markets feel like they're moving. Narratives are changing almost weekly, and what ends up happening is we see more and more people expecting multi-year returns within a quarter. It's not entirely their fault. We've had a couple of really exceptional years, whether that was during 2020 or even this year. People have this unrealistic expectation of returns when time compresses. The third thing which happens is people start obsessing about outcomes. And I see this a lot with the investors that I interact with. They'll often tell me how great they have done in their demo or virtual portfolios. So I see this phenomena where people start anchoring their obsession on what I could have had instead of what I have built. And the thing about this approach is, even though there is an element of imagination, and for innovation and progress, imagination is brilliant, but backward imagination is really just regret. The dangerous thing about chasing outcomes or desire is that we end up making a contract with ourselves that we will be unhappy until we reach a certain point. While feeling behind can be a great motivator to get something done, it's also a really dangerous feeling to have. We often see that this feeling doesn't spur on the right kind of behavior. For example, it doesn't make people study more. It doesn't make them necessarily work harder. If anything, it makes them want to speed things up. It makes them feel impatient. It creates that sense of urgency. What happens in investing is we see people end up trading more. They end up changing strategies or changing lanes, and they constantly override their own internal systems of belief. We know that most investing damage doesn't come from being wrong, it comes from trying to catch up, trying to make different decisions at different intervals. That sense of trying to catch up creates this urgency, it creates this over-engineered interventions, it creates this decision inflation and very often leads to emotional fatigue. We have to pause for a minute and reframe our thinking around feeling behind, because progress, especially in investing, but very often in life, isn't necessarily linear. It's bumpy, it's stumpy, it's lumpy, it's sometimes a few steps back before you take a step forward. We have to remind ourselves that most long-term investing returns arrive in short, uncomfortable bursts. They're often interspersed with long periods of stagnation, of boringness, of almost nothing happening, or sometimes they're interspersed with drawdowns, which are equally uncomfortable. Then suddenly you have this 1 year that counts, the 1 year that made all the difference. And we get this phenomena where people or stocks that looked like they were behind often look lucky late, really had nothing to do with it. The middle part, the boring part, feels slow. It feels like nothing is happening. And here's the good news, because if you're compounding and if you're doing it right, it will feel like nothing is happening for a long time. When you are compounding, the journey feels uneventful most of the time. Compounding doesn't only apply to money, it applies to most of life, to the way we increase our skills, our judgment, and it can really only take place if we stop interrupting it. So if being behind isn't about performance or progress, being on track needs a new metric that isn't performance. A simple way that you can practice it is by asking yourself, are the decisions that I'm making consistent? Is the risk that I'm taking aligned with my life, my goals, and where I am right now? Are you still following the same rules? Then the truth is, if those still hold, you're probably not behind, you're just in the early part of your curve. So feeling behind is often the reason people interfere with their investments, their skills, their life. Delegation then fails when people try to speed things up in an unnatural way. Trust requires patience with the process. Most systems don't fail because they're bad, they fail because people don't give them enough time. So when you have that feeling of being behind, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are. It usually means that you are comparing the middle part of your journey with somebody else's end of their journey. And the hardest skill in investing isn't intelligence, it's patience with time. Most of the people I admire talk less about money and returns and more about freedom, leverage, and time. This feeling of being behind often creates urgency, and urgency is usually where mistakes begin.